Hi, it's Mary Ann. This podcast is the replay of our first book club meeting with Aging and Amazing. We met with Andrea Couture, author of the memoir Embracing What Remains, which documents her journey with her father and Alzheimer's while raising young children. Taught in the sandwich generation, Andrea had to balance the needs and give her energy and attention to two families at once, not an easy task. She is a gifted writer and a member of the AlzAuthors management team, serving as an acquisitions editor, bringing new authors into our collaborative, and moderator of this book club. Welcome to the AlzAuthors podcast. We're so glad you found us. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'm Mary Ann Shuko, a registered nurse, author, and dementia daughter.
And I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a licensed educational psychologist, dementia daughter, AlzAuthor, and coach focused on the sandwich generation. Please join us for bi-weekly episodes with our authors as we talk about their dementia journeys, sharing intimate details and painfully obtained knowledge to help others currently on that path.
We hope these stories offer you comfort and support as we strive to break the silence and stigma surrounding a dementia diagnosis.
May one of our authors speak to your experience.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi, welcome to our first Books and Chit Chat with Aging and Amazing, featuring Andrea Couture and her memoir, Embracing What Remains. I'm Mary Ann Shuko, a founder and manager of AlzAuthors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our team who are with us today, starting with Christy Byrne-Yates, who is author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation, based upon her caregiving journey with two parents with dementia. She is my podcast co-host and producer and is helping me to host this event.
Hi, so excited to be here.
Yeah. And is Malika here?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
I didn't see
here.
Hi, Malika.
Hi.
Malika Moore is a licensed social worker and an aging life care professional in the District of Columbia in Maryland. And she founded this beautiful Aging and Amazing community and company that strives to support older adults, caregivers, and the networks that surround them. She has served in several different capacities in her professional career, including clinician, geriatric care manager, medical social worker, psychotherapist, support group facilitator, and adjunct professor. So welcome, Malika. And we also have Allie Parker, and she's Malika's associate and an undergraduate college student at the University of Maryland studying psychology. She plans to go into mental health therapy and has a special interest in the older adult population. Hello, Allie.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everyone.
And we also have Ann Campanella, who is a member of the AlzAuthors management team and author of the memoir, Motherhood, Lost and Found. Hi, Ann.
Hello. Great to be here.
And Flory Munat. Did I say that right, Flory?
It's Manat.
Flory Manat is author of Be Brave, A Wife's Journey to Caregiving, and she is our February author. So please get Florrie's book and get ready for next month's book club discussion. And also Sue Fagaldi-Lick is here. She is a poet and author of Gravel Road Ahead, as well as many other volumes of poetry, and is getting ready to publish her memoir about caring for her husband with Alzheimer's. And she's currently pulling together our poetry anthology. So hello, Sue.
Howdy. So glad to be here.
Terrific. Did I get everybody on the team? I think so. All right. I think we're ready. Let's get started. And now I'd like to introduce our featured author, Andrea Couture. Welcome, Andrea. Please tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Andrea Couture. You guys can call me Drea. Sometimes it's easier to remember and pronounce. I did write Embracing What Remains. I published it about 2 years ago. And actually 2.5 at this point. It was June of 2021. I live in New Hampshire. I have 3 kids. They are now 7, 11, and 15. Mostly I'm a stay-at-home mom turned author, I suppose, and advocate for Alzheimer's and dementia, as I am an AlzAuthor, and I'm also an acquisitions editor for AlzAuthors, which means I'm part of the team that reads books and welcomes them to our collection if we find them appropriate. I don't know. I guess that's it. I'm almost 45, so there you go.
Okay.
That's all. So I'm wearing glasses, yes.
You're one of our young ones.
Yeah, I guess.
So you mentioned your children, and I know that your father was diagnosed when you were either pregnant or had just had your last child.
Right.
So it was a very busy, anybody here who has children knows a very busy, hectic time in your life. But I wanted to ask you how you had personally balanced your competing priorities as both a new mom and a homemaker, wife, and then daughter to a parent with dementia.
I think in the beginning, when my dad was first diagnosed, he was still functioning fairly well. And so when my son was born in February, my dad was diagnosed in November of that same year. I think it was just mostly in the beginning was like a mental and an emotional thing, like I was still probably going through not postpartum, but like that idea that I just had a baby. And so I was processing the emotions of loss while at the same time, raising a baby and 2 other children. But as time went on, it did become more of a physical challenge. My parents live about 35 minutes from me. And it was a lot of like bringing the baby with me to go visit or have my parents come down. But it just was that added layer of now I have to make sure mom and dad are okay. Typically when you're my age and you have a baby, your parents are the ones still kind of helping you out. But now I was trying to make sure dad was walking okay and wasn't going to trip into the house and while chasing a toddler, after a while. And then it was just like, I didn't know who to choose sometimes, it was like, I had to leave my kids sometimes to go see my parents. And that was a difficult choice. And then when it became overnights, it was even harder. So there was for me, it was a lot of mental anguish, on top of everything else. So a lot of choices, a lot of choosing between, my children that really needed me and my parents who needed me too, So it was a hard balance. I had a very supportive husband, so that was really helpful. So, yeah.
Great. Did anybody have anything they wanted to share on that topic? No? Okay.
So let me just say, you know what, Andrea, I totally get the choosing, and I'm so glad you said that and used those words, because I think it's really easy to just say, well, I did what I had to do and it was really hard. But the truth is there are times, right, when you have to choose who gets you.
Yep.
And that's a hard that's a hard one. So thank you for using those words. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I just wanted to comment on the grief that you mentioned. So it's like you're supposed to be having this joyous time of welcoming your baby, and now this uncertainty of what's going to happen next with your parents. And just, could you tell us a little bit more of like how you juggle those emotions?
I don't know if I did, like I think I was in denial for a long time. But at the same time, having my baby and having that small toddler was so comforting at times. As challenging as my kids are, he was such a breath of fresh air for me. He brought so much joy that I think that I was actually really lucky to have it happen when it did. It was actually really good timing, because my dad even seemed to bond with him more than he did with my other kids. And I've heard that about some dementia patients, where like the little ones, they tend to kind of, I don't know if they just connect better or they just seem like, I don't know, but it was, all of it was such a blessing in disguise, I think, for me. Eventually, I did seek therapy, but that was after my father passed away, to really deal with my grief. It was like while I was going through it, I almost didn't reward myself with therapy. It's like I waited. I was like, I'm going to go after my dad dies. And I don't know why I did that to myself, but that's what I chose to do. And then I dealt with all of it. So that was kind of, and I tried to do other self-care things like exercise and just spend more time just, I guess, focusing. And then writing my book was huge for me. It was such therapy for me. So,
Right.
yeah.
Because your father was still living when you wrote the book.
He was, and he was still living when the book ends too. Like at the end of the book, my dad is still alive. I think date-wise, it's probably January of 2021 when I end the book, and my dad didn't pass away till May of 2022. So, yeah.
How did the rest of your family feel about you writing the book and such a personal story?
Everyone was really supportive. My mom was like, yes, go for it. She read the whole thing and she really approved of it. I let my sisters read it, and one read it after it came out. That was up to her. And she was like, oh, I wish you should point out something in it. And I said, well, you could have read it. You didn't read it, and so sorry, I could change it now. But overall, everyone was really supportive. My in-laws loved it. My husband, my kids, like whoever was mentioned in the book, I had read beforehand or get their approval too. And so it was a really positive experience. And none of it was like, it wasn't a memoir, like a tell-all, like, it wasn't that kind of story. And it wasn't my intention ever. So it was a positive experience from my family and friends that were in it. So,
Drea, I just wanted to say I really resonated with your experience, because I too was a younger caregiver in my 30s when my mom developed Alzheimer's. And I loved what you said about holding your son and what a comfort he was, because I felt that same way with my daughter when she was born. It was like, I didn't want to let her go, because she was that sense of calm and peace and beauty and joy in the world. And just beyond that, there was a lot of grief and difficult emotion. So thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Lori, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I had a question about writing your book while your dad was still alive. And I just wondered, you may not know the answer to this, but do you feel like you have another book in you from the perspective of after he died, something more tuned into grieving perhaps, or are you journaling about it?
I am actually, and I started writing probably a month or two after I published the book again, like writing little vignettes. And so I do have almost another book, but I just don't know if and when I'll publish it. It's written more like little vignettes and me reflecting on it, not so much the story, like the novel that Embracing What Remains is. So I worry that people won't enjoy it as much or want to read it. I think the format intimidates me, even though I felt really good writing it. And yeah, I talk a lot about grief. I talk about actually when my father dies. I tell you that story. I talk about, the months leading up to it. And then I actually go a whole year after he dies. Like I write a whole year kind of vignettes following his death too. So we'll see. I don't know. My mom wants me to publish it. She's like, you need to publish that. And I said, I know. It's just, as writers and authors, it's very, I don't know. It's like such a leap of faith to put your work out there. And it's funny because I always say, I can't believe I say that about the second time, but the second time is more intimidating to me than the first. I don't know why.
Yeah. That's, I think, for all authors, especially if your book was very well received and successful, and then you're afraid you can't replicate that success again.
Right. I think that's part of my concern is.
But it sounds like an interesting book, and it would be very helpful to younger people who are also grieving the loss of a parent. Alzheimer's like that too. There isn't really a lot written for that population, and most of the things are older people, which is kind of the course of the whole thing, really. But there are a lot of younger people that I think sometimes get forgotten or left.
I think so, and I think that I touch upon some stuff in grief that I didn't realize I would have. Like, for example, there's this section I write about. We're in Maine on vacation, and we're on this trolley, and there's all these people on it with us, and it's like warm, and the air's blowing, and then I see this older couple who's probably, like 75, which is older than my dad was when he passed away. My dad was 73 when he died. And so they're going to a clam bake, and they're all kind of talking about it. And I started to cry because I was like, you know what? I'm not sad that my dad's not with me. I'm not sad that he died, but I'm sad that he's never going to be that person, and that's part of grief, is like grieving what will never be for them, And so I think that we all have that in certain situations with grief, whether it's a child that you've lost and they're never going to be, or, you just think about the life that they'll never have. And so I write about that and how it's just sort of like a realization for me, that it's not that he's gone. It's not that I missed him right there. It was that I missed his future for him, So.
Malika?
Yeah. Think so. Kind of still on this topic of grief. I know your dad was very successful, and so I know, just talking to a lot of caregivers, being a long distance caregiver myself, is how was it for you? Sometimes I'll hear caregivers say, like, I was grieving, or I felt the loss before the person I knew was gone before they passed away. And so when they passed away, some of them didn't have many tears because they felt like they shed so many, like that example you just gave. How was it kind of reconciling? And another piece is, sometimes I feel like it could be hard as the disease progresses to determine, okay, what's really the disease? Because I know this person to be so strong and being able to do X, Y, Z.
So you want me to address watching him decline, maybe from where he was, or
whatever you like?
I think the biggest thing that I struggled with for my dad was his lack of speech, and then eventual loss of speech. There was no way now for us to communicate, and so it was like he was this. I don't even know if you would say like shadow for like 2 years. It was just like this body, who once in a while smiled, and he was so calm. He was so whatever, but it was like he was gone. He was just like going through the motions. But so, yeah, I definitely lost my dad before he died, and that was really hard. And so it wasn't like, oh, he's dead and now I'm going to grieve. It was like I grieved the minute I found out he had dementia, and it just carried on, for like 5 or 6 years. It was, what's next? What's he going to lose next? Or what ability? And then it became, when people ask us, and I know this happens to everyone with Alzheimer's, a connection. They say, oh, do they still remember who you are? I have no idea if he remembers who I am. How am I supposed to confirm that? He doesn't speak, right? And so I thought it all the time in my head, but I was like, he was never going to forget me, and I know Marianne has said something so beautiful before where she said they don't ever forget the way that you make them feel, and it's like, or they know that they love you. They may not know who you are, your name. And, it didn't matter to me anymore. And so I had to really lower my expectations and I guess, I write in my book, find the simple joys with my dad, really simple. If I could get him to smile at me one day, that was going to be enough. So yeah, there was a lot of grieving of, watching him decline from this very successful, I don't know. It was just so humbling in so many ways, but also, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it was also really beautiful to watch my dad decline and lose him before he died, because I saw him in such a different light that I also see that as a gift, that I started to see my father as a man and not just this surgeon or this famous doctor or whatever. He became just a man to me. And I really value that experience, saw him as a human. So I don't know, maybe that's just the way I process grief, but yeah.
That's really beautiful. Sue, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. And I really identify with how you felt about your dad. I felt that same way with my father, that I really see human to human as opposed to the authority figure that he had always been. Yes, there was that. I wanted to ask you about your mom. You're dealing with your kids and your father, but, she was there all the time. And were you worried all the time about her and her safety and her mental health? And she was also being deprived of being free to be the full grandma probably that she wanted to be.
Right.
How did that go?
That was really hard. I mean, in the beginning, it was okay. And then it was like, mom's never leaving the house. She won't leave because first she was like, well, your father can't be without me. And then it was, for the last year of his life, it was, he's going to die if I leave. And then he'll die while I'm gone. And I don't want that to happen. It was like, oh my God. So there was so much with my mom, because my mom's very emotional. And so I was helping to balance her emotions too. And she has health issues. And so we were worried about her a lot. She actually had multiple emergency room trips while my dad was sick. And again, in the beginning, it was okay. We could leave my dad home alone. But as time progressed, it was I guess, Mom, you're going to the ER on your own because I have to stay with Dad. And it was so it was so much anxiety for me. It was anxiety producing all the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, she struggled. I'm sorry, to go back to, I remember one night we had a conversation, I think I write about it in the book, where I'm just like, Mom, this sucks. This isn't fair. And she was like, you're right, it's not. And she's like, I want to be with my grandkids and I have to take care of your dad instead. And so she struggled a lot with that. And I started to shift my focus. I was like, never mind my dad. We have no relationship anymore that I have to work on. It's my mom. She's going to be here after he goes. She's the one who's really present and here. And so I started to focus on her, So you have to keep a lot in mind when you're balancing these relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
And what about your relationships at home with your husband and your children? What was going on with them?
It was good. Everyone really understood. There was so much, a lot. I think the last 2 years of my dad's life, I was gone probably 1 to 2 nights a week. And it just became our norm. And then I'd be gone a lot on the weekends too, and it was just they were so good about it. But it was definitely like a survival thing. We were not thriving as a family. We were just like surviving. And what a blur sometimes, but like I was so lucky to have my husband be so supportive. And I think I also write about it in my book about my mother-in-law telling me to do whatever I had to do. And Dennis, my husband, will be fine because she lost her mom at a really young age. And she's like, I wish that I could have been there for my mom and leave my kids with my husband. She's like, so you should do it. She's like, you go be with your dad. So I had a lot of support in that way, Yeah. I mean, we made it through, like we did it.
I was reviewing the book because I had read it when you first sent it to AlzAuthors. I was the one that picked it up and loved it. But I was reading again today, and just the opening scene with you working with your dad, trying to get him to wash his hands, which was something he had done so thousands of times as a surgeon. It was just ingrained in him, and yet he couldn't do it. And there's despair. And then you move from that dramatic, in the moment scene of such profound loss by something very simple. And then to go into this the scene where they're having the birthday party and he's being regaled by all of his colleagues, or his retirement party.
Retirement, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and being regaled, by all of his colleagues and friends and everything, and just the juxtaposition of the two men, really, that are described there, and what prompted you to start the book that way and to introduce him to us in that way.
I don't know why I started that way. I don't know if I read something that was like, start with an action scene. And then also I think I really wanted to show that, like, I wanted to jump ahead a little bit. I wanted to do some time hopping, and then jump back and tell you the story from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I thought that scene was just so poignant because of the hand washing. It was like a way to introduce my dad and his position and career and sort of where we were at in life. Looking back now, I don't know, but now it makes a lot of sense. And I'm actually really happy I started that way. It might have been also one of the things that happened that sort of I did write about later, or thought, wow, I could put this in a book because it's so wow. The hands for me were big. I remember thinking I was even going to have hands on the cover, and then I decided against it. But just because my dad's hands were his life, they were his career. They were everything. So, I think, the action and just a simple scene, but something that really kind of set the tone that this was not going to be a book that was, was going to tell a story, and it might not be a happy one. Yeah. I don't know. I don't really remember how or why I started it like that.
Thanks. Did anybody have anything they wanted to ask or refer to in the book? How you felt about the book? Anybody have any comments?
Yeah. I just think it really impacted me because my dad is also a doctor, and I resonated so many of the things you were saying about that larger than life feeling and seeing him as more of as professional and all the things that he knows and almost infallible. It really resonated with me, especially since this year is the year he's starting to finally think about what comes next. He's retiring at the end of the month. He's 72. And so many of these things are coming. And I know growing up as a kid, I always just had this feeling like he's working so hard. He's working so hard. Is he going to be able to retire or take time before something happens and he can't enjoy life anymore? I've always just had, for some reason, this anxiety about that. And I think it's just this feeling like knowing someone you see as so great and grand has mortality as well is what was behind that anxiety. And I think just reading the book really resonated with me. And thank you for kind of putting those feelings into words that I'd never really been able to say.
Oh, you for sharing that. Yeah, I think, and I think in the book too, I say my profound fear of my father ever maybe losing abilities or dying, and how it all sort of happened, and how I'm still here and I'm okay. You know, and I didn't think I ever would be like, and I also didn't think I'd ever be able to mentally handle that. And yet I did. And so I hope that other people can see that too. You know, like people can fall from a pedestal and still be important in your life and still be something that, you know, you never thought they would be to you. And I think I developed this like true love for my dad. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, that was like about who he was and not like what he was, you know? Yeah. So, yeah. But I get your fear. I really do. I had that for a while too. And then it started coming true. And but I'm here to say, like, it's okay. Like, you'll be all right, you know?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Drea, Anne had asked if maybe you could read that beginning of your book. Would you like to do that?
Oh, is that what you want, the beginning? Okay. Yeah. How much of the beginning do you think, you guys? I'm not going to read the whole chapter. You don't want to hear me drone on for that long.
Not that long.
How about the first scene, just until
the
airplane? Because
right,
I'll read that the scene at the sink. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I had to assume the sink was his destination as my father got up from the table after he finished lunch. He did not answer me when I asked where he was headed. A man on a mission, he kept moving across the honey-colored oak floor in his slippers that made a whispered shush as he shuffled. My father went to perform a task he had done thousands of times, maybe even a million, over a 40-year career as a surgeon. He can do it, I thought. He stopped at the sink and looked down, then up and out the window. The ground was blanketed in a crusty frozen sheet, and the trees bent and bowed under the weight of the snow, as if to honor their onlooker. The trees did not move, and all remained still outside. The mountain had not brought its usually notorious wind with it that day. My father's hands reached out to the black abyss of the sink, but that is where the action ceased. Dad, here, put your hands under the water like this. Look at my hands. See? Dad, look at my hands, I said while staring at his unmoving hands. While I stared at his unmoving hands. My father and I stood side by side at the kitchen sink in the dream home my parents built only a decade ago. Our heights had caught up as he aged and shrunk with each passing year. I studied my father's face as he stared straight ahead out the window, his brown eyes glazed over and unfocused behind his glasses. He can't do it, I realized. I finally grabbed his hands, placed them under the faucet, and added soap. Dad, can you rub your hands together? Dad, can you rub your hands together like this? I asked with more urgency to my voice. He started to rub his thumb and forefinger together on one hand as if he was snapping them. My father's 70th birthday had recently passed, and I was showing him how to wash his hands, just as I showed my 3-year-old son, Henry. Realizing that made me wilt a little inside. He wasn't really following me. I felt my eyes blur with tears, and a twinge of impatience and annoyance pinched my throat. I knew he was slipping deeper. I knew his disease was eating away more of him. I wanted him to do it on his own. I reached for the dish towel on the counter and dried his hands. For a moment, I pretended he was a surgeon again, and I was his operating room nurse, prepping him for surgery. Maybe this act comforted him, or maybe it confused him. I half joked, "Doctor, your towel?" I used this moment of levity to escape the dark reality we were navigating, and for one brief instant, I imagined the man he was 5 years ago. Yep. Yeah.
Poignant.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Was
push you right there.
Hard to see. Yeah. The kitchen, yes. Where I was many times after that, let me tell you. Spent a lot of time at that window, thinking, whatever. But yeah. So
Sue, you want to comment?
Yeah, that's, and especially comparison to teaching your little boy. And, I see mothers doing this all the time, put your hands under the sink, a little soap. And, but they can learn. And your father was going the other way and could not learn. That's so hard. I wanted to ask, did you work with an editor or a critique group for anybody while you were doing this? Or was it all on your own?
So I wrote the whole thing, and then I contacted an editor who specialized in memoir editing for women at the time. And so her and I went through it. I think she did a copy edit. She did a developmental edit. So it was sort of like she would go through it and she'd say, I want more emotion here. Tell me more how you were feeling. Like I would tell the story, but she's like, how did you feel? And so that really helped bring out a couple more things for me. So I worked with her a little bit. But I didn't do any, I didn't have ARC readers and I didn't have beta readers other than my mother who would read it and be like, I loved it, so. Yeah.
Yeah, I did that with mine too. And she was like, I need more of your love story. I need more Fred, she was not just the nitty gritty, but give us more of the feeling part of it. Yeah. Yeah. It was really helpful for me too.
It is helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Lisa.
Hi. Let me put my hand down there. So I found your book because I have searched often for books of daughters and, caring for their fathers with Alzheimer's. So I was super excited to hear about your book and to order it. And actually, my husband was in the States at the time, so he was able to get it there for me and bring it back here. We're in Mexico. But anyway, I was totally drawn in immediately by the beginning of your first chapter. And I made so many connections because I feel like we seem to have a lot of similar experiences. But something that I'm left wondering is, what were your typical days that you would spend with your dad? I mean, I know they changed as his symptoms progressed. But when you would spend a day as his caregiver, what kinds of things, what was it like?
So not often was I on my own with my dad when he had dementia or Alzheimer's, because my mom was usually there. So, and then eventually we hired caregivers because he needed, more care. And then my mom needed a break. But in general, my dad he wouldn't do much. He would sit around. We would sit. I know in the beginning it was he had these cards and they had pictures on them. And so I'd show them, I'd almost quiz him on birds and stuff. And he'd want to do it sometimes, or he'd do it with me, or we do a little kid puzzle. It sounds awful, but my mom for so long had this entire bin of stuff to keep my dad's brain active. She was working so hard to save him. And after a while I said, Mom, just let him, let him be, just let him relax, because it's, it's not working anymore. But so he would just sit a lot. He actually sat so much he ended up developing a foot infection in his heel because he would cross his ankles, and and so my dad wasn't running away. He wasn't fighting us or anything. He did end up having a caregiver that took him for walks all the time, and we would go for walks too. I'd take him outside and go for a walk, but it was really just sit with him, maybe help him in the bathroom a little bit if I was the only one there, make his meals, sit with him while he ate. And then he became bedbound for the last 2 years of his life. So then it was just sitting at his bedside, feeding him, changing him, doing everything. He was completely immobile at the end, towards the last 6 months, maybe even a year. He couldn't even really use his hands. He would just be there, So it was a very quiet time. My dad didn't talk. It was I don't know, not very involved, but it was involved. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Present. Yeah.
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 It was like,
it just continues to amaze me how every case is so different.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like he wasn't like mobile, really. He wasn't combative. He wasn't angry. It was almost like he was so apathetic. It was just like, Dad, hello? You know, like it's hard to even get a reaction sometimes out of him, you know? I don't know.
Lori, did you want to say something?
Yes. Drea, first, I just wanted to say I related to your experience with your editor, because when I wrote my memoir, that's exactly what the editor said to me. You have told us what happened. How did you feel about what happened? And that's where you dig in and you do the real work of grieving and piecing together whatever kind of meaning you can make out of what happened to you, even though it's pretty irrational what happened to you and undeserved, but that's life. So my other question is, did you ever find ways to communicate with your dad that were nonverbal? I've been reading a lot about like music and art and maybe even just touch. And I just wondered if there was any, you had any responsiveness to nonverbal outreaches to him.
Yes. I mean, we listened to music a lot together, but again, he didn't really have a lot of reaction. His eyes did a lot of darting around or might smile a little bit. And he'd answer simple questions, like, yep, no, but it's funny that you say the touch thing, because one of my friends from college, her dad died of Alzheimer's, and she said to me, touch is so important, especially towards the end of his life. And so I did start giving him massages. I'd rub his feet, I'd rub his forearms. He had a fist that was always like this, or like his hand was, and so I felt bad. So we'd like rub his fists or his hands, his shoulders, I never knew though how he was feeling because he wasn't reacting to me. So I was just like, I'm going to do nice things for you and hopefully it's okay with you, the art thing I know is a thing, but my dad didn't do that. My mom didn't explore that with him, but we did a lot of music with him and reading to him. My mom would read to him. His caregivers would read to him. It's funny, my dad was such an avid reader, and with Alzheimer's or any dementia, maybe he couldn't focus anymore and he couldn't remember what he read. So he stopped reading and I never connected the two. And so if you read to him, like at least you could hear a voice, and like a nice soothing, I think it's like you kind of go back to like caring for small children. Like how would you care for a baby? Like you would make sure their physical needs were met. You might stimulate them in other ways, but yeah, they're not going to communicate back necessarily, like it wasn't even like my dad could cry. It was just like, we never knew when he was in pain. It was like sad, it's hard to know.
Drea, what was your relationship like before your dad had Alzheimer's? I mean, were there certain ways that you and he connected? And I'm just wondering if there was anything that was left after, maybe in the early stages of the Alzheimer's that you guys still had. Or I know he was such a busy surgeon, he may have just kind of been out doing his work so much of the time.
Yeah. We had a couple connections. We skied together. So my dad was a big skier. He skied up until really the winter before he was diagnosed. He was skiing because I got pregnant shortly after we stopped skiing. And then, I had the baby and he had dementia. So we connected on that. We have the same college. We went to the same undergrad. So sometimes, my dad and I had a good relationship. I tended to be the daughter. There was three of us that would ask him about his life. I wanted to hear his stories. I wanted to hear his past. If we all were drinking some wine, I might be like, Dad, tell us a good story about, I don't know, a crazy surgery you did, or when he liked to talk about when he was a young attending. They go back in time sometimes with Alzheimer's. And so he would still talk about that. But in general, my dad was a simple man. He would just be like, how's the weather? Or he'd call me on the phone or, but like we didn't have this we were not so very close, and I think that's why I struggled so much with his disease was, well, wait, this was my chance to get closer to him. And so I missed out on asking him so many more questions and finding out so many more stories. And, when you lose your loved one, you're like, oh man, I should have talked to them about this or that. Like you really kind of reflect back on that and wish you had said more or done more with them when you had them, We had a lot of respect for each other, though, and I was always really honest with my dad about stuff. And that was sort of our thing, If I didn't like something, I was going to tell him. And if I did like something, I was going to tell him too, So that was kind of how we were.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Your book, Drea, was the first book that came to AlzAuthors that was written about the pandemic and about the lockdown.
Yeah.
So, you ended it in 2021 early. So really it was during the thick of it. So how did that affect your caregiving journey? And we are still going through the pandemic now and people are still struggling with COVID and with isolation and things like that. So it's still a problem.
Oh, when COVID hit, it was like such a punch to the gut for my family. I was like, really, we needed one more obstacle, now how do we even, it was like, it was almost like unbelievable. Cause I was like, now I can't even go there, and I just remember saying to my mom, we should put Dad in a nursing home because what if you don't have care for him one night? And that was like following my mother, falling and going to the ER herself and being incapacitated for a month. And all I could see was, okay, now she's not gonna be able to care for him and things are gonna get worse and a caregiver's not gonna show up. And then what? I go there and I give them COVID or something. It was ridiculous. But my mom said no, because if we put him in a nursing home, he'll be locked there and we'll never see him again because of COVID. It was like we couldn't win, right? And so every day was like a piecemeal, fingers crossed that the caregiver shows up, that they don't have COVID, and that they wear a mask as my mom is requesting, and it wasn't even about my dad. It was like, if Dad gets COVID, okay. But if mom gets COVID, we're screwed, and it's funny because my mom eventually got COVID, but it was 6 months after my father died. That's when she got COVID. So, and she's fine. She did fine. But yeah, it was so stressful. And again, choosing between my family, because I could have gone up there. I could have said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go live with my family and my parents and just stay there. But I was like, I have kids. They're remotely learning. My husband has a job and he has the only job. And so he needs to work it. And he would go to work. He wouldn't remote. He would go. He's crazy. But, and that added stress to us too, because I was always upset that he was going to work. It was I don't know. I think I might have had a mini nervous breakdown at one point.
Oof. Allie, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So I'm 21, so I don't have deep experience as a caregiver, but I worked at an assisted living home for 4 years from 2019 to 2023. So the thickest COVID that was, and that's my closest experience with caregiving, because the only thing I did for a couple of years was work at the assisted living home. And I was I worked in the kitchen, then I worked in activities. So I still wasn't a titled caregiver, but for those years I felt like a caregiver to all of them. And I'm sure so many of them would say the same to me, that was such a hard time. Like you were saying, no matter which side you were on, whether you were at home trying to care for your parents who also live at another home, or if they lived in a nursing home. We had residents who, there was a couple that lived there, and immediately when COVID happened, the daughter took the two of them and we never saw them again. I hope they're doing well, but because they couldn't fathom the idea of their parents not being with them with so much uncertainty. Mm-hmm. Really crazy, very hard time. It was, shaped a lot of things, but I'm really grateful for how much I was able to connect and build relationships with so many of the residents, because it really did it was great. I was so grateful I could be that person for them. And frankly, it was a hard time for us all. And I was glad that they were kind of my saving grace as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank
yeah,
you,
it was a
Alex.
crazy time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to read another excerpt? Did you have something else in mind?
I did, if you guys. Yeah, it was going to be more about a trip to the ER with my mom and sort of how I watch that process go without my dad. You guys want to hear it? I mean,
yes.
Some of you have read it, so hear it again. Okay. I think my mother welcomed the visit to the ER as it was a break for her. She was taken care of, had no responsibilities except for herself, and her health was someone else's priority. As a mother, I understood this, and I tried to remain respectful of this for her. I still hurt for my parents that my dad, the doctor, couldn't accompany her to the ER and be her voice as he had been for so many years. A few months prior, my mother had gotten a cat bite, and again, the blood thinners put her in a category that meant she needed to get to the ER immediately. That time, I took her while my dad stayed home. The ER doctor asked her who she lived with, and she said, "My husband, he has Alzheimer's, so my daughter came with me." She cried upon saying this. I choked back tears that day as well. I knew that was hard for her to say out loud, to admit, and most of all, to accept. That day in the ER exam room, while my mother said that through tears, I really felt as if life had shifted. My dad really wasn't there and wasn't able to be there to help. But I realized after that day, we got through it without him. My mother received the care she needed, and we did it together. It didn't change the fact she was missing my father at her side. She had lost her medical touchstone, her partner, but it proved she could do it on her own, whether she wanted to or not. In some ways, I think it was harder to witness my mother not having my father with her because of his disease than if my father had actually died. My mother not only had the struggle of losing a man who still lived, but also the struggle of taking care of him while grieving him. I grieved for both of them as I witnessed their relationship change and morph into something completely different than I had ever known. I witnessed my mother gain confidence in taking charge of her own health while my father slipped away into a battle with his, all while knowing that if he was healthy of mind, he would have been on the front lines with my mother. I missed my father's medical expertise and confidence, but I also just missed him as my dad and my mom's partner. He wasn't gone, but he wasn't there. The level of pain and frustration that presented to me was unbearable at times, and I wanted to scream and cry. It isn't fair. This is not how it was supposed to go. I wished he was still old dad. So that was a big turning point, when we realized that, as sad as it was, that, these were things we thought we couldn't do without my dad, and we could, So it was like all the things. It was like my mom gaining confidence and strength in herself while also being sad that she had to do that. But it was, I don't know, a lot of poignant moments and life stuff, big life things.
I had a similar situation, a turning point, the same kind of a thing with my stepfather when he was going through a workup for dementia, and my mom got into an car accident with a friend and came home and had many broken bones and was severely debilitated, and he was of no assistance.
Yeah.
He could do nothing for her. And that's when I realized that we were going to have to make some changes because, he was slept through the whole thing. And then when they came home from the emergency room and she said, "I was in an accident, I'm hurt," he said, "Oh," and then he just rolled over and went back to sleep.
Yeah.
So it was like, I said, "Oh my God, he can't even help take care of her." So that is so mind-boggling because normally that would be what he would do.
Yeah, I don't talk about it in the book, but there's a time when my mom fell. She fell multiple times. And the first time she fell, it was pretty bad. And my dad was in the room and he just stood there watching. And I was like, oh, Dad, like, what do we do? And my sisters were like, and I was like, well, we need to call 911 because she's on blood thinners. And if she has a hematoma, which she ended up having, but she went to the ER that night and we were there for 10 hours. No one slept. One of my sisters stayed home with my dad, and it was just like, he wouldn't go to bed because he was like, well, where's your mom? But it was like, you're not even, like he doesn't even understand. He's not helpful. Like it was so stressful. Oh, that was a crazy time. That was just one of the times. I think she went to the ER 3 or 4 times when my dad was sick. So, yeah.
Did anybody else have anything to add to that? No? All right. Well, we are coming upon our end of our time, and I want to thank everybody for coming. And thank you, Andrea, for sharing your story and being so generous with your time and your insight. I know that everybody got something out of that.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can be among the first to know everything at AlzAuthors as a subscriber to our weekly newsletter. You can sign up at AlzAuthors.com and check your inbox every week for our news, introducing our latest author, podcast, special events, and more. And be sure to visit our blog, podcast, bookstore, and shop at AlzAuthors.com to find more resources for your dementia journey. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we share a wealth of resources for the dementia journey. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much for being here. Malika, did you want to say anything about Aging and Amazing?
Absolutely. We're so glad to partner with AlzAuthors. I think the first book club was a success. And if you'd like to discuss more about the book within our online community, we'll put the info at agingamazing.com in the chat. So you can email us if you're not already in there, because we've been talking weeks and weeks leading up to this. So it's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an AlzAuthors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on AlzAuthors, please visit AlzAuthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to AlzAuthors@gmail.com. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, totally reliant on donations to do what we do. If our author stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.
Hi, I'm Anne of AlzAuthors. When I was caring for my mother with dementia, I searched long and hard for memoirs and personal stories about other caregivers' experiences. I wanted to know not just how other people survived, but how they thrived. Unfortunately, at the time, there was not much available. That's why we created the bookstore at AlzAuthors.com. Now, busy caregivers can easily browse for just the right resource to guide them on their journey. Books are categorized by relationship and type of dementia, as well as genre. You'll find a helpful title in just minutes using our search tool. So, after the podcast, take a few moments to visit our bookstore at alzauthors.com/bookstore. Remember, you are not alone.